Hello and welcome into another episode of Coding Imposters. Today we have an amazing guest, Heather Dice, who went from almost no coding experience to going through a coding bootcamp and now is currently employed as a web developer at Altus Inc. Heather shares her experience of working in the education field and moving to the developer field, how to deal with imposter syndrome, and her expectations that she set for herself after coding bootcamp. That's enough for me, so let's jump into the episode with Skylar and Heather. Well, welcome in, Heather, to the Coding Imposters podcast. Great to have you here. For those of you that don't know Heather, I guess we never had a class at the Coding Dojo together, but you spoke a couple times to my class, and then we spoke in another class together, so that was always fun. But Heather, why don't you just kick it off? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me. So my name is Heather. I used to be a teacher and professional musician, and teaching through COVID, as anybody who did it, was absolutely miserable. And I knew before COVID that teaching might not be my forever job. I was really more invested in the music side of things. But when I realized neither were going to help, provide me the life that I was really wanting to live, I knew there was going to be time for a change, and the pandemic really spurred that on. So I wound up quitting teaching mid-year in March of 2022, had no idea what I wanted to do. But a friend of mine who was in a similar situation, her sister had left teaching and become a software engineer and was doing great. And so I talked to her sister, learned more. She happened to have attended Coding Dojo. And previously I had made a list of everything I wanted in a career, and was working on trying to find a career that fit that list. And when I read up more about software engineering, software development, web development, that whole realm of careers, I realized it really checked every single box for me. And even though I had never really written code before, I had copy pasted some HTML to make things work on my school's learning management system a few times. So that was like the extent of my coding expertise going into this.
So it checked your boxes in the sense of you really had like a love and a passion for coding as you looked into it, or was it more of the boxes of, hey, I can be remote, I can make this amount, those types of boxes?
Yeah, I absolutely don't have a passion for coding, which is hilarious because that's not to say that I don't enjoy coding. Sure. I do. And I actually code on the weekends on personal projects, which I honestly didn't think I would ever wind up doing. So I enjoy it enough to the point where I do it in my free time. But I would definitely not call it a passion. I wanted a job that wasn't my passion, because when I worked a job that was my passion, it completely burned me out. And so being able to work a job that I still enjoy, but I'm not over the moon about, is kind of nice, to be honest. So it checked all my boxes in that it was going to be able to provide me with what I needed in my career, which is that I wanted something intellectually stimulating. I wanted something that was constantly evolving because I like to learn constantly. I didn't want something that was totally static. I wanted something with a mix of team and solo work because I'm rather introverted, so I like my alone time. I like to work on things by myself and feel very autonomous in my job. But I like having the support of a team. And so those were some things in, my career that I was really aiming for. Lifestyle wise, I wanted something that was going to provide, ample opportunities for financial growth, and was something that I was going to be able to leave work at work so that I wasn't going to feel like I was constantly needing to take work home just to stay afloat. And so software development wound up checking all of those boxes for me. And I kind of dove right in. I did take a little bit of a Python course on Udemy just to make sure that it was something that I at least liked, because I didn't want to work a job that I didn't like. But then I wound up diving into the boot camp and not looking back from there.
That's awesome. And I think from your story, Skylar, I have a new theory. The reason we can't get jobs is because all of the teachers after COVID decided to quit, and now we're going to, this is 2 out of 3. We've only had 3 guests, and now it's 2 out of 3. So that's a 66% rate.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, that's true.
I talk to teachers all the time who are trying to leave, and they worry that they really don't have transferable skills. And I'm convinced that's one of the main things that got me hired were some of these transferable skills. So,
Really?
So to any teachers out there who are struggling, you've got it. You can get there.
Interesting. I'd actually love to dive a little bit more into that because I wasn't a teacher, but I was a youth pastor. So similar thing where I'm like, it's easy. I know a ton of people who have quit that and they're like, well, all I have is ministry or nonprofit skills. And so I try to go outside of that and no one wants me. No one wants to hire me or look at my resume, whatever. So just dive into what was those transferable skills from teacher to coding? Because I don't think most people would connect those.
Yeah. So for me, my big ones were communication, organization, and the ability to explain things simply. So I still am a professional musician. I just played a wedding gig yesterday. But now I get to choose the gigs that I want to do for fun rather than needing to take everything, which is nice. But so for me, being a professional musician, and then in the classroom or in my private studio, I taught children, right? So I can't be talking at this super high level. They're not going to understand. I have to break it down into the smallest possible pieces. And so in one of my interviews, it wasn't all people from the development department. The chief revenue officer was actually in the interview. And one of the first things he said was, I'm going to tell you, I don't understand anything about code. So any of the code questions that they have, I'm not going to know what you're saying. I'm not going to understand the answer. I'll just defer to them. And I said, oh, well, luckily for you, I used to be a teacher and I can break things down and in a way that you should be able to understand them, and feel free to ask me questions along the way. And sure enough, by the end of that interview, he said, I actually understood everything you were talking about. And so being able to communicate things on a basic level, you have to be able to do that. You're not always talking to developers. Sometimes in my meetings, I'm now the development liaison to the marketing team, and I have to be able to explain to the marketing team. They don't know what code is, and I have to be able to explain to them what we're doing, why it's taking as long as it is, or why what they want will take longer than they think it will. And so that's a really, really valuable skill that teachers or people who have worked with children are going to really excel at. And then communication and organization are things that all teachers have to be able to excel at. And bringing that into any career, not just software development, not just even the tech industry, any career is looking for someone who can communicate and be organized. And all teachers have to be able to do that to be successful. So those skills are really easily transferable.
Yeah, it's a great story. And you left out even the best part of the story, the PowerPoint. You didn't even mention that.
I was trying to keep things relatively brief, but
okay. Yes. I love that you were talking to our class and you're telling us about how you created a PowerPoint for your interview.
Yes.
And I was like, that's genius. So I created a PowerPoint for my final project and
awesome.
I did the same thing.
Yeah.
It worked well. You can take little snippets of the code,
exactly.
screenshot them and then.
Exactly. Yeah. So I got really lucky in this interview for this company. They asked me to present a project that I had made. And I have major testing anxiety. And one of the worst things about coding interviews is those coding tests, right? Even if they're take home, it doesn't matter. There's usually a time limit. And as soon as you put a time limit to something that's less than, like, say, a few days, right? I freak. And so when they said, show us a project, I went, yes, okay, I can do this. And I went full teacher on it, anticipated every single question they were going to ask me, made it into a PowerPoint, complete with, live links to the repository and to the project, screenshots of the code snippets with explanations of what they were. And they literally didn't have any questions to ask me in that interview because I had answered them all for them ahead of time. And then at the end, though, the CTO, who's now my boss, the only thing he asked me was he wanted to see one of my functions because he was actually working on a similar thing and he wanted to see how I had done
your
it.
homework. Okay.
And basically, right? He wanted to see, luckily he wasn't looking at the whole thing. He was just looking at the PowerPoint at the time. And he took one look at it and went, oh, that's clean. And I was like, that sounds good.
Yeah,
that's positive. I'll take that. So yeah, so teachers often we often are expected to go above and beyond just as part of the job. And so when you get into a new job and you go above and beyond because that's what you're used to, people look at you and they're like, wow, you're doing a lot. You could even back off a bit. And you're like, why? This isn't half of what I'm used to doing, and
Right.
So yeah, teachers wind up doing really, really well. And I think a big part of that is communicating in the interview, understanding the job that you're applying to really well, and being able to communicate why your skills transfer into the job. And I think that's where most people probably get stuck, is not being able to reach that point of communicating that effectively.
Yeah. No, that makes great sense. I think that's really good advice. And Skylar, I'm curious from you, I know your work experience is very wide, all over the place. Do you look back on things and think about what could be transferable to your coding life or the programming job eventually?
Yeah, but I'm not a teacher, so I can't just go, oh, this is awesome. This is how it's going to transfer. I'm like, I used to cut hair. So
but you talk to clients, you still have to talk to people, as you know.
No, I know. I'm just
yeah. You worked out your fingers, which helps you type faster. I don't know.
Oh yeah, because I'm a fast typer. Actually, that's one of the one of the tropes of coding is you have to be a super fast typer. You see all the videos, everyone's like, I'm in
keyboard.
And then it's like reality. Everyone's just like, dude.
So you sit there staring at the screen for a while, wondering if what you're about to do is going to work. And then you try it and it breaks. And then you sit there staring at the screen for a little while, trying to figure out why that broke.
Or you'll do something and it will break, and then you'll reverse it and then it's still broken, and you're like, why did this happen?
Yeah, Aaron, my teacher, he had so many famous lines. We actually made him a shirt post-graduation with all of his famous lines. But one of them was, do you want one finger coding? And so the idea was, if you hit with one finger, one of the letters, and it's not VS Code or whatever you're using isn't auto-populating for you, you probably did something wrong, because generally it should auto-populate with the function name or class or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. So there you go. You don't need to type fast.
I think when people are switching careers into coding, it can kind of be hard to find those transferable skills. And so you really want to figure out, okay, what were my skills in the career that I was in? And then take a step back. Well, what did that require? Take a step back. Well, what did that require? Take a step back. And you're going to find that you're at some of the most basic soft skills that any human being should have. And so if you can communicate how you used that in your previous career and how it translates into the career you're moving into, you're golden. But a lot of people have a hard time because they don't know. They think they know about the career they're going to, but they don't do enough time to talk to people who are already in the career to really fully understand it. And I think that's where part of the divide comes. I see a lot, like I said, I talk to a lot of teachers. So I see a lot of teachers have these really big misconceptions about what working outside of teaching is like. And that 100% will translate on your resume and in interviews. And so the more you get out of your current career and talk to people who are in the career that you want to be in, you're going to get a clearer idea of what it takes to be in that career field. And you'll be able to communicate how what you did before can translate into that.
Did you, when you were going into the job search, did you try to connect to a bunch of people who were in that job field? You had a sister or have a sister-in-law who's already in the field that you're in now, but
it was a friend's sister who was already in.
Got it.
And she had been through the dojo and then gotten a job working for Williams-Sonoma. Through the dojo, I also met someone who had just graduated before I started. We bonded in one of those sub channels in Discord. I think it was the books channel. We were talking about books that we liked. found out we lived relatively close to each other, which was wild. And she was working for the same company my mother works for. And so got to talk to her a bunch about what it was like working for that particular company. My husband works in HR for a parking and real estate company. And so he connected me with their CTO and their software developer, who then connected me with other people. So it's just, a lot of people start out, I didn't know anyone really who worked in software development. I didn't even know what it was before I started with the dojo. And so people a lot of times will say like, oh, well, I'm a teacher. All my friends are teachers. My spouse is a teacher. My family is, I come from teachers. All I know are teachers. But they all know people. Do they only know teachers? I highly doubt that. And so you go to people and, sure, they might not be in software development, but do they know someone who's in software development? Can you connect with them and say, hey, you and I both know so-and-so. I'm trying to break into this career field. Can we have a chat? And so I would get together and do informational interviews, sit down in a virtual setting, mainly because a lot of times people lived kind of far away from me. But if you can do it in person, I would recommend it. And I would ask them questions, what is your day-to-day work like? And how did you get into this field? And, what were some of the projects you built for your portfolio? What do you see new people coming into the career? What kind of skills do they really need to have to be successful? What are some things that have made some of your employees your most successful employees? Asking them to look at my resume and asking them to look at my portfolio. And I think I probably conducted these kinds of interviews with maybe 5, 6, 7 people, all in a bunch of different places. And now none of them had any job openings that they could encourage me to apply to. So I didn't get lucky in that sense. But that is a possibility by doing these interviews, that as they talk to you, they go, hey, you know what? I know of an opening. You should apply. I'll let them know you're applying, and you might be able to get it in that way. I wasn't that lucky, but even if you're not that lucky, you're still gaining information about the job. You're still learning what it's like day to day, what it takes to do the job. And the more you know about those things, the better you're going to be able to represent yourself on your resume and in an interview, because what they're ultimately looking for is someone who understands the job and can do the job. And if you don't understand it, you already missed step 1. And so you're not going to be able to do the job if you don't understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's genius, because I know career services, they talk a lot about networking, and it's often, hey, go to LinkedIn, look up businesses that you want to work for or people in your area. And that's fine. It kind of works. I mean, I've made a few connections that way. It's a little bit awkward, sending a cold message and stuff like that. And, it's not very fun. I'm used to it because that was my world of work before that. It was all online, making remote connections, stuff like that. But I think for a lot of people, it's terrifying. It's weird. It's awkward. I know, Skylar, you haven't done as much towards that, but it's what you're saying is almost like the game 7 Degrees of Separation, right? And it's not even 7, it's like 2, right? It's like
100%.
It's so much easier to make a connection if it's like, hey, I know this person knows this person. Of course they trust that person. If they want to set up a meeting, like, I'm sure you had a lot easier time doing that than, hey, I saw you on LinkedIn and we're kind of in the same region of the United States and you went to Coding Dojo. Will you talk to me?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said earlier, I'm a total introvert. So really throughout all of the dojo, when I was being told those strategies, it overwhelmed me. It freaked me out. And a lot of the people who would come and talk to us in the dojo who had been successful, a good number of them were like crazy networkers. And so I definitely felt at one point that I wasn't going to be able to find a job that, it would just be a stroke of luck, because I'm not going to go out there and talk to some random people and message random people. That's very frightening for me. But when I at least knew that I had another connection in common with someone, and that person had already kind of mentioned me to them, so it's not a cold reach out. They already knew I'd be reaching out. that brought the pressure way down for me. And it was just the same as, being, at a work party with a friend and they're introducing you to their work colleagues. It felt, and is that a super comfortable situation? No, but it's not as bad as like cold reaching out to someone who's never heard your name before.
Exactly.
So, and I didn't even think of what I was doing as networking until after I got the job, and I kind of looked back on my process and went, oh man, I was networking out the wazoo. And I didn't think of it that way, because the way we're told to network is by kind of making those cold connections. And that some people are good at that. It's not for me.
Yeah, probably not for most people, I would say.
Yeah, I would think so.
I know, Skylar, you're not that way either, right?
No. I'm usually like, oh, I hope I run into someone who can code, and then I talk to them about it.
Yeah, and then the same thing with like open source projects, right? They tell you contribute to open source projects, and I'm like, I don't know these people.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's so hard to get into those.
Add to the petri dish of code that it already is.
Yeah.
Oh man, how did you find the job that you currently work at?
So that's a great question, because I was applying on so many different platforms. I must have found it on one of them, but I don't remember which one.
Okay.
I honestly don't. And people ask me that all the time. They're like, oh, where'd you find this job? And I'm like,
I just threw it out there a bunch, and
I was on so many, every single platform I could be on, I was on to try to find a job. I think the one that I liked the most was Ada. They have a lot of entry-level developer jobs, and you kind of fill out a form beforehand, and they only initially show you jobs that match what you filled out on that form. And the form's pretty extensive. It's it asks you your experience and what you're interested in and everything else, and so that's a good one.
Nice. How do you spell that? Is it just ADA or
OTTA?
Oh, way off.
Ata.
Got it.
Yeah, like auto, but with an A.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah,
that's for those of them who are listening who can't look it up right now. Yeah. Not for Luke.
That site's great. I don't remember that I found this one on that site, but I just remember always looking for jobs on that site because the UI is really pleasant and easy to navigate, and it really only shows you jobs for the most part that you are qualified for. So that's nice. Takes some of the time out of hunting. Definitely use LinkedIn, but I always applied on the company website. I never applied through LinkedIn because scams. I used Built-in, not with a lot of success, but it was there. There was some apprenticeship website that I applied through a bunch, but I don't remember. So yeah, there's tons. And then of course, anytime I heard of, some big opportunity, like a big apprenticeship or internship cohort opening up with a big company, I'd apply through the company website.
Cool. Yeah. And it's nice that you got one through the job search sites, because I know for me, it became like overwhelming and a little bit demoralizing because you just apply to so many. First of all, you don't hear back from like 90% of them, probably, if that. And then the ones you do, it's often a quick, oh, sorry, we decided to go with someone else, or no, it's sorry, you're not the person this time around, but thank you for applying. We'll keep your resume on file, yada, yada, those types of things. And when I heard you speaking, I also saw this in the show notes. It sounds like you had a little bit of a different mindset going in. And I'd love for you to talk about that as you're applying to all these jobs before you got that one. How did you deal with the imposter syndrome? How did you deal with some of those rejections? Yeah,
so I told myself that it was going to take me a year to find a job. My full expectation was I was not going to get hired for another year after graduation, because I knew graduation was not it. I knew that I was going to have to spend a lot of time making projects. I knew I was going to have to spend a lot of time filling in some gaps, practicing algorithms, because frankly, I wasn't the best at them when I left the dojo. Mm-hmm. And so,
is anyone?
Right. And I am not an algos whiz at all.
So did that mindset come from just yourself, or did someone, like a friend that was in the tech space, tell you that? Was it your career services? Like, hey, wait, you're going to be waiting a year, or was that just something you came up with?
It really came from myself because, I have a bachelor's in music education. That took me 4 years. I have a master's in music education and performance. That took me 2 years. And, this boot camp took me 4 months. 4 months. I'm really going to change my entire career from 0 to hired in 4 months. No, I am not.
But that's how they marketed it,
Yeah, well, I saw right through that. So
yeah, okay, good.
So I told myself it was going to take at least a year. And so anytime I got a rejection, it was, well, of course they rejected me. I'm not ready yet. Well, of course they rejected me. It hasn't been a year. It's only been a month. It's only been 2 months. It's, and so I really, I'm not even kidding you when I tell you I wasn't bothered by it because I had set myself this deadline, sort of, not really a deadline, but an expectation that I wasn't going to get hired right out of the boot camp. I wasn't even going to get hired a couple months down the road. And so that kind of, I see that as embracing the imposter syndrome, recognizing, yes, I am new to this and it's going to take time. And that's part of the process, and it's okay. And I'm not telling you it was easy either. I was unemployed at the time. We're living off of my husband's income. He's working a side job to keep us afloat. We're scraping by, pulling out of savings every month. So it's not like I was, living it up and, I can get hired whenever. No, the year was also kind of our financial limit too. So if I didn't get hired by that year, it would have gotten even more scary. So, it was still really hard, but I think I kept my anxieties down by giving myself this expectation that it wasn't going to happen overnight. And in fact, it wasn't even going to happen in 4 months. It was going to take even more time beyond that.
That's a really, really good way of looking at it, actually, because I feel like maybe Luke, I don't know if you're the same way, but I went into the boot camp totally embracing their, like, you're going to get a job so fast, like watch everyone switch careers. Like when you talk to them, even like from other boot camps or schools, I talked to a couple colleges as well, just to try and like figure out what route I wanted to go down. And they were all just like, you get this and then you're going to get a job. And I know like 3 or 4 people just this past month who graduated last week and they're already making over 6 figures. And you're like, like the total, just like,
yeah, it sounds great.
Way out of proportion.
Yeah.
It sounds amazing. and then you leave and you're like, oh. Yeah. Okay.
And there are people who do that, and that's awesome for them. But like I said, the people that I've talked to that reached that, they were either absolute whizzes at networking and like hit that hard day one of the boot camp, not day one of their job search, but day one of the boot camp, they were already networking. Or like they happen to know someone coming out of the boot camp that helped them along the way. Or so like, that's where the networking is important. But also I feel like part of my ability to maintain that realism, because the first few people I talked to, they had gotten hired right out of the boot camp. So that had my hopes up in the beginning for sure. But I think what helped me maintain some of that realism was the fact that I spent a lot of time talking to people in the industry. When I talked to people in the industry, I could also see how far I still had to come and the things I still needed to work on. And so that helped really ground me and help me see that there's still a lot of work to do here. And so don't get discouraged by the rejections because I still need to do that work.
And maybe it's just that everyone has to go through a process of getting their hopes crushed a little bit so that they can sit in that realism. Because I feel like that's what's happened for me, where it's even the career services. I've talked about this before. Donald, my career service manager, said, hey, at this point, the market's not great. Expect 6 months to a year. He's an expert. He sees this. He's working with, so many different students. But somehow it's still in the back of my mind. I'm like, well, maybe it's only going to take a month. You never know. Like,
but I'm different.
Right. I'm different. I'm special. I don't know. Like,
and that's not to say that you have to give up all hope. Right. You can still hope that this job interview 1 month out of the boot camp is going to be it. This is all I need. You can still hope for that. There's nothing wrong with that. And of course, it's okay to be, disappointed and discouraged a little bit. You just don't want that to completely overwhelm you and prevent your progress and prevent you from moving forward. So I kind of just realized that, I embrace the imposter syndrome. I call it the imposter syndrome monkey. He's always on my back. But it is what it is.
That should be our mascot.
The imposter syndrome monkey. Yes, absolutely.
Change it all. Change the logo right now.
Well, think about when you first started your previous careers, right? Did you feel like you were on it 100%? You could do this? Or was there a little imposter syndrome monkey on your back? Like, he's always there, always. And he's going to pop up at different points in your life. And so what you do is you embrace him and you decide that, it's pretty impressive for you to have tricked these people into thinking you can do this. And for your next trick, right? For your next trick, if you get an interview, right? You have successfully tricked someone into thinking that you're a viable candidate.
There you go. I like that.
Then when you get into that interview, your next trick, you're going to trick them into thinking that you are such a viable candidate that they want to talk to you again.
Oh.
And so embrace the inner trickster god or goddess within you and fool people. And that's how I turn the imposter syndrome around.
There you go. Forget algos, Skylar. We just need to start doing magic tricks and practicing illusions.
Yeah, just trick people.
I'll go buy a top hat real quick.
But that's what it feels like, right? Because you feel totally inadequate on the inside.
Right.
But if someone pulled your resume for an interview, they saw something in you. And so it's your job to, prove to them that they were right. Even if you think they're wrong.
Yeah. So you had a year, or in this mindset, you had a year, and you said, I need a lot of work to do still after the boot camp. Were there certain things that you focused on? Were there certain strategies you had? Because I find it hard, when you're trying to do so many things. We've talked about this before of, I'm supposed to be applying to jobs. I'm supposed to be networking. I'm supposed to be doing algos. I'm supposed to be doing projects. I'm supposed to be, it's just the list piles up and up and up to the point where I'm like, I don't know what to focus on anymore. And there's 5 million technologies to choose from. So what were some of your strategies as you tried to grow?
So I'm not going to pretend like I was organized at all, because I definitely was in the same boat. They tell you you're getting so much information from so many different directions saying, oh, you need to practice algorithms. Oh, you need to build projects. Oh, you need to know about big O notation. Oh, you have to practice your OOP. You've got to, interview, mock interviews. You got to do those. Oh, you got to network. Like, there's so many things. It's so easy to get so overwhelmed. And so I was not organized about it. Some days I was, reading up on Big O because I thought I'd be asked that in an interview. Some days I was, looking at mock interview strategies. Some days I was doing actual coding and building projects. It was definitely all over the place for a while. I would say for me personally, the things that helped me the most were definitely, practicing algorithms, because they're just always going to be good for you, as annoying as they are. The way that I did that is I would pull from a bunch of different sources for these algorithm problems, and I would have them solve them in VS Code, and I would put them up into a repository. So that was my way of getting in some daily commits, and just so that my GitHub would look very active to anybody who's looking at it, because that's something that they do look for. So that was kind of my quote unquote easy way of getting in some daily commits. And sometimes my commit was just going back and commenting on something, or it was going back and resolving the algorithm with a new thing that I had learned. And so it didn't necessarily mean I needed to solve an algorithm a day, because I absolutely didn't, but that helped. And then another thing is I recognized just one thing from Coding Dojo that I was interested in, and I dove into it a little bit deeper. And for me, that was front-end development. So I didn't learn any new languages or anything like that. I just dove into more of front-end. I took some courses with similar, it's not really a boot camp, but it's it's a website that offers coding courses for women. It's called She Codes. And I took a bunch of courses with them. It's all front-end development. And so I didn't learn any new languages, but I learned some more skills. I learned about SEO. I learned a little bit more about Bootstrap. I learned React. And so I just took something that I learned in the dojo and dove deeper into it. I wouldn't recommend, especially if you've already done 3 stacks at the dojo, or if you've learned multiple object-oriented programming languages through your bootcamp, I wouldn't recommend picking up yet another after graduation. You run the risk of spreading yourself too thin and not really learning enough about what you've just grazed the surface of in your bootcamp. So I would definitely say, when it comes to all the technologies out there, pick something that you're interested in and dive real deep, because I haven't used code or Python in my coding since I graduated. My company's old code is PHP and WordPress, and their new stuff is Node.js and React. Learned it all on the job. So
there you go.
You don't even know. You don't even know that what you've learned in the bootcamp is something that you're going to do in your job. So why pick up yet another thing and then not be
I
as
think
strong?
It's a really easy trap to fall into.
100%.
Skylar, I'm curious to hear if you struggle with this, because I'm sure I could ask my wife, and there's some like counseling brain psychology going on here, but I feel like it's so much easier to jump to something that you get that initial hit of dopamine as you jump into a new tech or a new framework or whatever, because it's easy, it's familiar, but you also feel like you're learning a lot in a really short period of time, versus the further I try to dig into Python, it's like such a slow grind where I don't feel like I'm learning as much or not as quick. And the next thing I'm trying to learn is much harder. So instead of, hey, this took me 3 days to build, now it's like, oh, I got to figure this out over 3 weeks. And so I'm not getting those instant gratification. I don't know, Skylar, do you agree with that, or what's your take on that?
Yeah. It's probably a mix of both, honestly, because when you're learning something new, especially for most programmers, it's always learning, always growing, right? Like I didn't get into coding because I was like not a problem solver, right? I love solving problems and I love figuring out things to do. And so when you get Python, you know Python decently well, right? Like you can make a website, make backend, do whatever. Then it's boring because you're like, oh, I'm not learning as much anymore. So that I think you're totally right. That dopamine hit is totally lessened. So
yeah, and I think also we're told that the more we know, the more hireable we'll be. When we see job postings that are asking for Java, we want to know Java so that we can make ourselves the most viable candidate for the role. Reality is, though, if you know any object-oriented programming language, it is pretty quick to learn another, and doing so on the job is fantastic motivation to learn that pretty quickly, right? So you're going to get there. And what was the case for me and the case for a lot of other junior devs is when I started at my job, really in the beginning, they just expected me to just learn the code. Now, when my boss realized that I knew and understood more than he realized, and I was learning a lot faster than he thought I would, he did have me start contributing to the code. But it was projects that were essentially back burner projects that had no deadline. So I could take as long as I needed to figure it out and contribute. And it wasn't a high pressure, high stakes situation because I didn't need it done by a certain time. So you are given time to learn on the job in most cases. In every case that I've heard of so far, I won't say that that's the case everywhere, but usually junior devs are given kind of the low stakes back burner stuff that doesn't have to be done right away. And you kind of move up into a place where you're working towards some bigger things and some harder deadlines as you start to get more familiar with the code base and show your capabilities. So I think that's a misconception, is that a lot of people seem to think that they need to already know these things going in because that's what the job posting says. And that's a fair understanding to have of it. But the truth is, you don't necessarily always need to know. As a junior coming into your first role, they're not necessarily going to require you to know every single technology and language that they use on the job. So if you see a job posting and you understand at least what those things are, or you've worked with something that was like that but similar, don't think you then have to go off and learn it before you apply to a job like that. Just to apply to the job like that and let them decide if you're going to be the candidate or not.
Yeah, good advice. And I'm wondering, what was the imposter syndrome like jumping into a job where you didn't know the language? And I'm sure that would, for me, that I'm like, man, I would already have anxiety just hearing about it.
I was honestly pretty excited. The days and the times that I wasn't in some kind of meeting, getting to know people in the company, I was typically told to just go off on my own and, start learning. So I spent a good amount of my first few days on the job just, reading about PHP, understanding how it worked, Googling different built-in functions that I was finding in the code. My boss, one of our first assignments was like, here's a code file, comment what these things do. And so it was just a lot of like Googling, syntax and variables and reading documentation. And it was almost like being in boot camp again. I kind of found it fun. I could tell that my boss didn't have super high expectations of like, I wasn't writing anything yet. I just had to figure out what it did. And I found that to be kind of a fun challenge. So I didn't feel very anxious or like there was any sort of imposter syndrome there. It felt fun to me.
Yeah, it sounds like a really healthy environment. As you're talking, I'm just jealous because it sounds like you have the junior dev dream job.
I honestly, the job is amazing in every way, except I will say that I do wish I would get paid more, but I am up for a raise and potentially a promotion. So I
congrats.
Won't have that complaint for much longer, I hope.
There you go. Well, I think that's where a lot of people are at. I mean, that's probably where Skylar and I are at. Like, we'll take a hit to the paycheck if needed just to get that experience and get the ball rolling, because I think in the tech world, like as you gain that kind of 3 to 5 year experience, it seems like a lot more pay or opportunities come about than
I'm in a rapidly growing company.
Boot camp grad.
I'm in a rapidly growing company, and so I have good optimism that it will get to be where I want it to be relatively quickly. And I'm still making more money than I ever did as a teacher, so I'm not going to complain about that. And because I do believe in paid transparency, so I'll put it out there that I'm making $50,000 a year. And I am paid hourly. So if I do work overtime, I get paid time and a half for that, which is, I love that. Coming from being a teacher where overtime was expected of you and never paid. It's so nice to be in a work environment where, they tell you when you've hit your 40, stop. Not just because of, they don't want to pay you overtime most of the time, but they also care about us and don't want us overworking ourselves, which is really nice. So my work environment, my work culture is amazing. So when the only thing was, oh, I wish I could be paid more, right, it wasn't that big of a deal because everything else is incredible. Totally. And it's, again, still more than I ever made as a teacher. So I'm living the dream, right. My personal dream at least.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate the transparency because as Skylar said, I think a lot of the narrative is, oh, if you're into tech, you should be at minimum a new grad is making $80K a year, or if not, 6 digits. And
and that's not realistic everywhere.
Yeah, to see that there is a route that's different, and after a year even, you're already getting a promotion, you're already getting a raise, and that is, I think, a great route, it sounds like to me.
I think I was told in boot camp at one point, they said, if you get a job that's like, if you get offered less than 80,000, don't take it.
Oh my goodness.
So that was the expectation too of like, you have to look for a job that pays you.
I doubt they're saying that 80. Now.
Yeah, right? Oh gosh, I think that's up to every individual, right? Like it should be, what can your household afford? My household can afford for me to be making 50K. That's perfectly comfortable for us, and but that's not everybody and where they're living. So 80K would be phenomenal to me, but if I was being offered this job at 50 and it was beyond my wildest dreams in every other area. I'm fully remote. I have a flexible schedule, and they mean flexible. They're really good about that. Everybody on the team is great, works really well together. The company culture as a whole is super inclusive and cohesive. And so why do I need to be making 80K on top of that if I can live comfortably on 50? And now other people would disagree, and that's okay. It depends, but that's where it comes back to like, it's all your personal goals, your personal lifestyle, your personal finances. I think that should be up to you there, because really we're all juniors. So
yeah, I need to make
Exactly.
200,000 a year just so I can brag on TikTok. That's my ultimate goal.
I feel like you get a lot of followers when you're like, I make 300,000 a year. This is how I budget for my month. And they're
Oh
like,
my gosh.
yeah, I don't care.
Yeah, social media, man, kills me. But anyways, before I get too side railed on that, I know our time is coming to a close. Skylar, any last question or thought that you had as our conversation has developed?
No, I loved the imposter monkey. I think like while you were talking, I kept thinking back to like just moments in boot camp and before that, and like various things like, oh, I can totally like envision a little monkey on my back with the like giving me the imposter syndrome. I'm like, that's a really awesome visual for people who like me need a visualization for that to help them along. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, and just knowing that it's always there too. Like this isn't the first time you've had imposter syndrome, and it's not the last, right? So, embrace it and just run with it.
Yeah. I keep saying this, but I don't know the counseling term, but my wife is a counselor for a school, elementary kids. And that's something she literally does with them is you try to personify it or something like, I don't know what the correct term is, but for a kid that struggles with a lot of anxiety, then you have an anxiety monster or worry monster that you can now address in the room. And it's not you, it's something else that you can now talk to or recognize. So it's almost that same concept, that same idea. So I really like that. And I think I'm going to have to start looking over my shoulder when I'm feeling that. And
just turn to that monkey and be like, you know what? You're right. We are completely new at this. And then turn it into tricking people that you can actually do
exactly
what you want
I'll start
them to
collaborating
think.
with them. Like,
Yes.
hey, what do you think we should tell them?
Teamwork. Teamwork.
How do we yeah, exactly. We're not against each other. We can, yeah.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
Awesome. Well, Heather, thank you so much for your time. This has been great. I feel like we could talk for a couple more hours, but any last couple things you want to share or places that people can follow up and connect with you if they want to afterwards?
Oh yeah, definitely. People, I said I'm an introvert, but if people approach me first, I'm like totally open book. I love to talk to people. I love to help people. I mentioned informational interviews earlier. If people, I know that cold contact thing is scary, but consider this podcast your 1 degree of separation. And so if you send me a message on LinkedIn, my name's Heather Dice, spelled exactly the way you think it is, DICE. And so if you send me a message on LinkedIn and say, hey, I heard you on the podcast talking about informational interviews, I'd love to meet with you and do one, I will absolutely agree and help you out there. So I'm also pretty good, especially with teachers, because I was one myself. I am a pretty good whiz at resume writing. So if there's any teachers out there struggling with writing their resume in a way that translates from teaching to software development, hit me up, ask me to take a look at your resume. I'd be happy to, because teaching resumes are totally different than corporate resumes. And there's another thing that people can have imposter syndrome on. So so definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn. Just message. If you don't send me a message, I will probably ignore you. Just because I'm going to be that closeted introvert going, I don't know who you are, go away. But if you send me a message, you say, hey, I heard you on the podcast, and then, Bill, whatever you want help with, I'm more than happy to help you with whatever you're interested in. So once again, it's Heather Dice, and I'm on LinkedIn.
Cool. And we'll put all that in the description as well, so it's a little easy access. So thanks again, Heather. It's been great. And I even felt just more encouraged from this conversation. Some great tips and wisdom, and your story, I think, is a good one that we're all hoping for and chasing for ourselves as well. So
I really believe you'll get there. You'll get there.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Heather. And we'll just wrap it up there.
All right, cool.
Thanks for listening on in to this episode of Coding Imposters. If you enjoyed it, feel free to share it with someone else, a fellow developer in need. And if you're looking for a community to connect with, please reach out to us in the comments, either on LinkedIn, YouTube, wherever you're watching this, Spotify as well. And we'll make sure to connect with you there. Thank you guys so much. And thank you, Heather, for this awesome episode. Appreciate you joining us. Have a good one, everyone. See you in the next episode.